Nora set her coffee cup down so carefully that it made no sound at all, but the woman across the table stopped mid-sentence anyway. Her husband had just told his business partner that the Harwick account had been secured thanks to good timing and a bit of luck. He said it with the easy confidence of a man recounting his own story. He said it while Nora sat 3 feet away, holding a cup of coffee she had not been offered, but had poured herself from the sideboard, because no one had thought to ask. She had spent 4 months on the Harwick account. She had drafted the correspondence, managed the introduction through her cousin in Philadelphia, and rewritten the proposal twice when the initial version failed to account for Harwick's particular aversion to risk. She had done all of this from the writing desk in the back room of a house that belonged to her husband, using stationery that bore his name, and no one in this room, including the man she had married, appeared to find that arrangement unusual. Nora smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the kind of smile a woman produces when she has finally understood something she had been trying not to understand for a long time. If this story reaches you tonight, stay with it until the end. Drop your city in the comments. I want to know how far Eleanor travels. The firm of Aldridge and Associates occupied the second floor of a narrow building on Commerce Street in Boston in the autumn of 1889. It handled the financial interests of manufacturing companies moving into the new industrial arrangements of the decade. The consolidations, the mergers, the delicate negotiations between men who had old money and men who were making new money and needed someone to translate between them. Miles Aldridge had built it over 12 years. He was 41, broad-shouldered, deliberate in his speech, the kind of man who filled a room without appearing to try. He was well regarded. He was considered fair-minded. He had, by every external measure, done well. Nora had helped him do it. She was 29. She had married Miles at 22. In the arrangement her father had described as practical, and her mother had described as fortunate, and which Nora herself had understood, even then, to be neither a love story nor a business transaction, but something in between that had no good name. Her father had been a colleague of Miles's father. The match made sense on paper. Nora had been educated enough to know what sense on paper was worth, and young enough to believe that worth might expand over time. It had not expanded. It had simply continued to make sense on paper, while she made it make sense in practice. She had begun helping with the correspondence in the first year when Miles's secretary had taken ill, and the Fenwick proposal needed to go out by Thursday. She had written it in an afternoon. Miles had sent it without reading it because he trusted her, and because he was due at the club by 6. The Fenwick proposal had been accepted. The secretary had recovered and returned. Nora had kept writing. By the 3rd year she was managing the introductory letters, the relationship-building correspondence, the careful social calendar that positioned Miles in the right rooms at the right moments. She had a gift for understanding what people needed before they said it, for finding the exact register of language that made a cautious man feel understood and a proud man feel respected. Miles knew she helped. He said, occasionally, that she had a good instinct for people. He had never said more than that. She had not asked him to. That was the part she would think about later. Not what he had failed to give, but what she had failed to ask for, and why, and how long she had been telling herself that not asking was the same thing as not needing. The autumn the Harwick account came through was the autumn that changed the arrangement, though no one would have known it from the outside. To the outside it looked like a successful quarter and a dinner party at the Aldridge house, and Miles shaking hands with a new client in the front parlor while Nora stood near the sideboard in a green dress that had cost her more than she had spent on herself in the previous 2 years combined. Harwick was a textile man from Providence. He had made his money in wool and was moving it into machinery, the kind of pivot that required someone who understood both the old relationships and the new ones. He had been introduced to Miles through Nora's cousin at Nora's specific direction, through a letter Nora had written in Miles's name and voice after studying 3 months of Harwick's business correspondence to understand exactly how the man thought. She had not told Miles she had studied the correspondence. She had simply placed the completed letter on his desk for signature. He had read it, looked up and said, "That's very good." Then he had signed it and sent it. At dinner Harwick had said he was impressed by Aldridge's instinct for the market. Miles had said he was glad the fit seemed right. Nora had refilled the wine without being asked because the housemaid had gone to the kitchen, and the pause had gone on long enough. And then the business partner had arrived, a man named Sutton, who wore his success openly and liked to talk, and Miles had recounted the Harwick account with the casual authority of a man who had made it happen. Good timing and a bit of luck. Nora had set her coffee cup down. Her friend Della Marsh, who was seated across from her, had stopped mid-sentence. Della had known Nora since they were 17. Della had a talent for reading silences. "Are you all right?" she asked quietly. "Perfectly," Nora said. She said it in the tone of a woman who was not going to say anything else. Della, who understood that tone, nodded once and asked Sutton whether he had been to the new exhibition on Tremont Street. Nora sat for the remainder of the dinner, with the particular stillness of a woman who has made a decision and is waiting for the appropriate moment to act on it. She answered questions when addressed. She laughed when the table laughed. She was, by every observable measure, present. She was already somewhere else entirely. Miles found her later in the back room, at her writing desk, with the lamp burning low and a letter half finished in front of her. He stood in the doorway. "Good dinner," he said. "It was," Nora said. He waited, with the comfortable posture of a man who had no particular expectation of what came next. "Sutton thinks Harwick will bring his railroad contacts in the spring," Miles said. "If he does, it could be significant." "I expect it will be," Nora said. He looked at her for a moment. She was writing again. He said, "Don't stay up too late." She said she wouldn't. He went upstairs. She stayed at the desk for another hour. She was not writing the letter she had started. She was writing a different one, to a woman named Mrs. Horace Pruitt, who ran a charitable organization on Beacon Street and had once, at a garden party, 3 years ago, told Nora that if she ever had interest in the administrative work, there was always more than enough of it, for a capable woman. Nora had thanked her politely and thought nothing more of it. She thought of it now. She sealed the letter and placed it in the outgoing post. Then she went upstairs. Miles noticed something had shifted within the week, though he would not have been able to name what it was. The house ran as it always ran, the meals, the appointments, the correspondence that arrived on his desk in the organized way Nora had established 6 years ago. But there was something in the quality of her attention that was different. She was present, but present in the way of a woman who is completing something rather than continuing it. He mentioned it to Sutton at the office. Sutton said women had moods, and Miles nodded with the confidence of a man who had filed the information and moved on. The letter from Mrs. Pruitt arrived 10 days later. Nora read it at the writing desk on a Tuesday morning, while Miles was at the office. Mrs. Pruitt wrote that she had thought often of their garden party conversation, that she had a position in the administrative oversight of the charitable trust, not a paid position, but a formal one, with real authority over the grant correspondence and the financial documentation, and that she believed Mrs. Aldridge might be exactly the sort of woman the work required. Nora sat with the letter for a long time. Then she wrote back and said yes. She did not tell Miles. She did not tell him the following week, when she began going to the Beacon Street office on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, telling the housemaid only that she had calls to make. She did not tell him the week after that, when Mrs. Pruitt showed her the grant files, and Nora understood within 2 hours that the entire documentation system needed to be rebuilt from scratch, and set about doing it with the methodical certainty of a woman who had been doing exactly this kind of work for 7 years without anyone calling it work. She did not tell him, because she was waiting to understand something first. She was waiting to understand whether this feeling, the feeling of walking into a room where her opinion was sought, where a question asked of her was a question that expected a real answer, where the work she did had her name attached to it, even if only in the internal records. Whether this feeling was something she had simply been without for a long time, or something she had never had at all. By the 4th week, she understood it was the second. Della noticed before Miles did. Della had come for tea on a Wednesday and found Nora at the desk with 3 folders of correspondence open, and a pencil behind her ear and an expression on her face that Della had not seen in years. "What are you doing?" Della said. "Grant documentation," Nora said, "for Pruitt's charitable trust. I've been helping with the administrative oversight." Della set down her coat. "Since when?" 3 weeks. "Does Miles know?" Nora looked up. She held Della's gaze for a moment. "No," she said. Della sat down across from her with the expression of a woman who had questions and had already decided which one to ask first. "Why haven't you told him?" "Because," Nora said carefully, "I wanted to know whether I could do it before I had to defend doing it. And can you?" Nora looked at the folders. "Yes," she said. "More than that." Della was quiet for a moment. "He'll find out eventually." "I know," Nora said. "I need to decide how I want him to find out." Della looked at her steadily. "What does that mean?" "It means," Nora said, "that I spent 7 years making Miles's work successful, and I would like, for once, to have something succeed that is mine." She paused. "And I would like it to be established enough that when he has an opinion about it, the opinion will not be able to change it." There was a silence. Della said, carefully. That sounds like a woman who isn't planning to ask permission. Nora said, very quietly. I have been asking permission for 7 years by not asking for anything. Miles found out on a Thursday evening in November, not through Nora but through a chance encounter. He had been at a dinner at the Somerset Club when the conversation had turned to the charitable organizations of the city, and a man named Crawford, who served on the Municipal Oversight Board, had mentioned that the Pruitt Trust had recently undergone a significant administrative reorganization, that the documentation was now exemplary, that Crawford had been reviewing their grant applications for years and had never seen the filing so clearly organized, and that apparently a Mrs. Aldridge had been responsible. Miles had said, I beg your pardon. Crawford had said, Miles, aren't you? Is that not your wife? Miles had said, she helps with various things. Crawford had looked at him with the expression of a man who was not entirely sure what to say next, and had changed the subject. Miles came home at 10. Nora was at the desk. He stood in the doorway. He did not say anything for a moment. Then he said, Crawford mentioned the Pruitt Trust tonight. Nora set down her pen. She turned in her chair. She looked at him with the composure of a woman who had been waiting for this conversation and had decided, some time ago, how she intended to have it. He mentioned the reorganization, Miles said. Yes, she said. He mentioned your name. She waited. Miles looked at her, the particular look of a man who has encountered new information about something he believed he already understood and is working out what to do with the gap. When did this start? He said. In October, she said. You didn't tell me. No, she said. I didn't. He was quiet. Nora, that is. He stopped. Started differently. Why wouldn't you tell me something like that? She held his gaze. She had thought about this answer for 2 weeks. She gave him the true one. Because the last time I did something significant for your accounts, she said, you told your partner it was good timing and a bit of luck. She paused. I wanted to do something significant and have my name attached to it while I did it, rather than after the fact when it was convenient. The room was very quiet. Miles's jaw worked briefly. I have always acknowledged your help. You have said I have a good instinct for people, Nora said. That is not the same thing. He said nothing. She watched him process it, which was a different thing from watching him accept it. He was a man who thought in practical terms, and what she was saying was not entirely practical. I don't understand why you would. He stopped. Reorganize a charitable trust instead of telling me if something was bothering you. Because, Nora said, if I had told you, you would have found a way to make it make sense, and then it would have been managed, and I didn't want it managed. I wanted it addressed. Miles stood in the doorway of the back room of his own house, looking at his wife of 7 years, and had the particular experience of a man who has just realized he does not know the terrain as well as he thought. He said, I'll think about what you've said, she said. All right. He went upstairs. She turned back to the desk. She was not satisfied. She had not expected to be. Being heard was not the same thing as being seen, and what she had said tonight was the beginning of a conversation, not the resolution of one. Miles would think about it. He would arrive at a version of it that was workable. That was what Miles did. The question was whether workable was enough. She was still at the desk when she heard him come back downstairs an hour later. He stood in the doorway again. The Harwick account, he said. The letter to Harwick, the introduction. Yes, she said. You arranged all of it. She waited. I signed the letter, he said. I shook his hand. I told Sutton it was good timing. He said it without inflection. He was recounting it the way you recount a thing when you are hearing it for the first time, even though it happened in front of you. Yes, Nora said. Miles looked at her. He was not a man who showed vulnerability easily. What he showed now was not vulnerability exactly, but something adjacent to it. The expression of a man who has been looking at a painting his whole life and has just realized the artist's name was on the back the whole time and he never thought to look. That happens a great deal, doesn't it? He said. Yes, Nora said. It does. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I owe you an apology. She said nothing. She watched his face. Not for one thing, he said. For the whole arrangement of it. He paused. I don't know when it became the arrangement. It simply was, and I let it be because it worked, and I didn't ask myself why it worked or what it cost. She said, it cost more than you know. I believe you, he said. He said it simply, without qualification, without immediately moving to fix something. He just held it. That was when she understood, for the first time in 7 years, that he was capable of doing that. The conversation did not end the arrangement. That was not how these things worked, and Nora was not a woman who confused a single honest exchange for a changed life. But something had been said that could not be unsaid, and Miles had heard it in the particular way. That means the hearing will not fade. He came to her at the desk 2 days later and asked, plainly, to hear more about the trust work. Not with the polite half-attention of a man enduring a subject out of social obligation. He asked with specific questions. What were the documentation gaps? Where did the grant applications fail? What precedents had she used to restructure the filing system? She answered him. She watched his face while she did. He was paying attention. That was the beginning of the second thing, which was slower and more uncertain than the first, and also more real. Mrs. Pruitt noticed the change in Nora before Miles did, because Mrs. Pruitt had been watching women navigate these particular complications for 30 years and had developed an accurate eye for the signs. She said nothing directly. She simply, on a Tuesday in December, introduced Nora at the quarterly board meeting as Mrs. Aldridge, our administrative director, and watched the room register it. The room registered it. Nora registered the room registering it, which was an experience she had not had before. Miles came to the December board meeting because Nora had told him about it, finally, straightforwardly, without apology. She had said there was a quarterly meeting of the Pruitt Trust Board, and she expected to present the reorganization report, and she thought he might like to attend, if he had interest. She said it in the same register she would have used to relay a social obligation, not performing confidence, simply possessing it. He said he'd be there. He sat in the third row. He did not attempt to sit beside her. She presented the report clearly, and with the specificity of someone who knew the material completely. 2 board members had questions. She answered both questions, with the slight pause of a woman who was choosing the most useful answer from several available ones. Mrs. Pruitt watched from the head of the table with the expression of a woman whose estimation of something has been confirmed. Afterward, in the general movement of people gathering their things, a man named Ashby, who sat on the board and had connections in the municipal government, turned to the man beside him and said, "Who brought her in?" "Miles Aldridge." Who was standing close enough to hear, said, "She came in herself." He said it quietly, and without hesitation. She identified the problem, and came to Mrs. Pruitt with a proposal. "I had nothing to do with it." Ashby looked at him. Then he looked across the room at Nora, who was talking with Mrs. Pruitt and did not appear to be listening. Whatever he saw confirmed something. He said, "She's quite good." Miles said yes, she is. He said it with a specificity that surprised him. Not the generous allowance of a man complimenting something peripheral to himself, the plain statement of a man naming something true. Nora had heard it. She had been listening because she had always been aware of every conversation in every room she occupied. She did not turn around immediately. She let it move through her. The plain fact of her name, her capability, said aloud by the person who had the most to lose by saying it and had said it anyway. Then she turned and caught Miles's eye across the room. He held her gaze. He did not look away. The months that followed were not a restoration. Nora was precise about this in her own mind, and she was precise about it to Miles in the conversations that became, slowly, something neither of them had found a name for yet. She was not returning to the arrangement. She was not reorganizing her life around his. The Pruitt work was hers. The Tuesday and Thursday afternoons were hers. The correspondence that went out under her name, and it did go out under her name now, Miss Nora Aldridge, Administrative Director, which was a thing she had asked for plainly and received without negotiation. That was hers. Miles had not argued. He had said, of course. He had said it as though it was obvious. Though they both understood, it had not been obvious 6 months ago. What was different now was harder to name. It was not that the old arrangement had been repaired. It was that they had stopped pretending the old arrangement was the same thing as a marriage. There were evenings now when Miles came to the back room not to pass through but to stay. He would pour himself coffee and sit in the chair across from the desk and ask about the trust work, and then listen the way you listen when you have decided that listening is the task, not the prelude to a response. He told her things, too, about the Harwick partnership, which was expanding in the directions she had predicted. About Sutton, who had made a remark at the office that Miles had found himself disagreeing with, in terms that would have been unfamiliar to him a year ago. About his father, briefly, in one conversation, the particular model of professional life his father had demonstrated, where a wife's capability was a household asset, managed and deployed but not named, and how completely Miles had absorbed that model without ever examining it. He said it not as an excuse but as an accounting. Nora said, "I know. I could see the model. I thought I could outlast it." He said, "I'm sorry you had to decide to stop trying." She said, "I'm not." She meant it in the specific way that was also the most honest thing she could offer. If she had outlasted it, they would both still be living inside it. She would still be at the desk signing his name to her work and telling herself the arrangement was practical. She understood now, loved certain things about the life they had built even while being slowly erased by it. That was the complicated part. It was not a simple story of a man who had been cruel and a woman who had suffered. Miles had not been cruel. He had been absent in a particular way, the way of a man who had never been asked to be present, and she had not demanded presence because she had not believed she was allowed to. The belief had cost her 7 years. She would not have them back. But she had stopped trying to pretend they didn't represent a loss. Miles understood this too, by January. He did not try to offer her back those years in the form of gestures or gifts, or the performed attentiveness of a guilty man. What he offered instead was something simpler and more difficult to sustain. He offered her the same quality of attention he gave to the work that mattered most to him. He read the Pruitt grant applications she brought home. He had opinions. Some of his opinions were wrong in ways she told him plainly. He heard the correction and adjusted. Some of his opinions were right in ways she told him plainly as well, because she had decided that directness would be the language between them now, or there would be no language at all. Della watched all of this from the position of a woman who had known both of them long enough to have perspective they didn't have about themselves. She had tea with Nora in February and said, "You look different," Nora said. "In what way?" "Like someone who knows where she is," Della said. "You used to look like someone who had arranged everything perfectly and was standing very still so none of it would fall." Nora considered that for a moment. She said, "That's accurate." Della said, "And now?" "Now," Nora said, "some things fall." She paused, and I noticed that the things that fall were never really load-bearing. The public moment came in March, at a civic luncheon hosted by the Municipal Oversight Board. It was the kind of event that mattered in Boston in 1890. The kind where the right people in the right room made decisions that would be recorded later as having happened through proper process. Nora was there as a representative of the Pruitt Trust, which had, over the course of 6 months, become the kind of organization that got invited to these things. Miles was there in his professional capacity. They arrived separately. This was not a performance of separation. It was simply the reality of two people who each had a reason to be in the room. Crawford was there. Crawford, who had first told Miles about the trust reorganization, and watched Miles say she helps with various things, took one look at Nora presenting her summary of the grant documentation changes to the board table, and turned to the man beside him, and said something quietly that Nora could not hear. The man beside Crawford said, "Who is she?" Crawford said, "Mrs. Nora Aldridge. She rebuilt the entire Pruitt Trust administration from the ground up in 3 months. She had also," he added, and Nora heard this because the room had gone slightly quieter as the board members gave her their attention. "She had also been the architect of the Harwick account introduction, which I understand has become one of the more significant partnerships Aldridge and Associates has negotiated in recent years." There was a pause in the room. Miles, who was seated 4 chairs to Nora's left, said clearly, without being prompted, without anyone asking him, "That's correct." He looked at Crawford and then at the board table. "The Harwick introduction was my wife's work. The documentation, the correspondence, the relationship cultivation. She built the account from nothing while I received the credit." He paused. "I wanted that corrected while there were people in the room who could carry it forward accurately." The room had the quality it sometimes gets when something honest is said in a place that has grown accustomed to careful language. Nora held very still. She had not expected this. She had not expected Miles to name it in a room full of the men he needed. She had not prepared herself for what it felt like to hear it said clearly, and without condition, with no private conversation preceding it, no negotiation, no request from her. She looked at him across the table. He was looking back. Not with the managed expression of a man who was calculating the effect of what he had just done. With the expression of a man who had decided that the true account of a thing was more important than his comfort in the telling of it. She understood, looking at him, that it had cost him something to say it. She understood also that he had said it because he believed it was owed, not because he expected anything in return. Crawford said, "Well, that's yes. Thank you, Miles." Someone else moved the conversation forward. The luncheon continued. Nora turned back to her notes. She finished the summary. Her voice was steady, her hands were steady. Underneath all of it was something she had not felt in a very long time, and recognized slowly, the way you recognize something you thought you had lost so long ago, that you had stopped counting it among your losses. She had been seen, not managed, not credited at a polite distance, not acknowledged in the private room of their own house where no one else could hear it. Seen, in a room full of people who would remember it, by the one whose silence had cost her the most. After the luncheon, in the corridor, Miles came and stood beside her. They walked out together into the cold March air. She said, "You didn't have to do that." He said, "I know." He paused. "That's why it was worth doing." She looked at him. The street was full of the ordinary afternoon movement of the city. People moving past them without interest, the sound of carriages on the cobblestones, the specific smell of Boston in early spring, which was river water and coal smoke, and the first tentative suggestion of something coming. She said, "I'm not finished building the trust work. I intend to take it further than Mrs. Pruitt has been able to take it alone. There are women in this city who are losing property claims because they don't know how to navigate the documentation, and I know exactly how to fix that." He said, "I know." He meant it as confirmation, not concession. She said, "And I will not be reorganizing my life to fit around your calendar again." He said, "I'm not asking you to." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she said, "Come to the Pruitt meeting on Thursday. There's a discussion about expanding the grant criteria to include contested inheritance cases, and I expect the board to be divided, and I would like you in the room." He said, "Why?" She said, "Because when I make the argument, I want someone in that room who understands exactly what I'm talking about and knows why it matters." She paused. "And who will say so when it's useful?" He said, "I'll be there." She said, "Don't be late." She said it without softness and without sharpness. "The way you say something to a person you have decided to trust with a specific thing." He said, "I won't." They stood on the Boston street in March of 1890, and Nora Aldridge looked at the man she had married without love 7 years ago. The man who had let her become invisible inside the life they had built together and had, finally, in the long slow reckoning of the past 5 months, decided to learn how to look at her directly. She did not forgive him in that moment. Forgiveness was not one moment. It was a practice, like attention, like honesty, like choosing to speak plainly when silence was easier. But she chose, standing there, to believe that the man in front of her was attempting to learn what she had already always known. That was not nothing. She had spent enough of her life trying to live inside nothing to know the difference. She walked back toward Beacon Street. The trust work was waiting. Miss Pruitt had left a note about the Thursday agenda. There were 3 grant applications on her desk that needed review before the weekend. Nora Aldridge walked through the March cold with her coat buttoned and her head straight and her name. Finally and at last, attached to every piece of work she was walking toward,